Hello, folks. Welcome back. Welcome back. We got another episode running solo, but here we go. You know, Omar normally does these intros, but I'm going to do my best. If you guys know any history and listen to the show, every time I do an intro, it doesn't come out well, you know, but hey, because it's not my job, you know. Omar couldn't be here, but hey. Anyways, today we got Aleko Bell with us. He studied at the University of Cumbria Masters, UNLV undergrad, studied biochemistry, sustainability, and finance. He teaches pedagogical, which is a hard word to say, by the way, standards to chemistry teacher for the British University of Vietnam, IGCSE, British Curriculum, Biology, Chemistry, and Physics at Hanoi Academy International School. Also is the host for the Intelligent Design podcast, and he is currently working on an audiobook, I believe, and also possibly a book. I'm not sure. We'll ask him right now on that subject. Welcome to the show, Aleko Bell. How you doing, buddy?
I am shocked that you got my name right. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Most people would say Aleko, or so I just don't even bother. I just tell them Alex, but it is Aleko. Yeah.
That's a good cop out, like Alex right there, huh? So whereabouts do you hail from, calling yourself Aleko Bell? You know, where's that from? Where are you from?
Yeah. So my full name is Alexandros Bellavilla.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah. So family is from Greece, but the last name obviously is a little bit Italian. So I have a grandfather from Capri in Italy.
Yeah.
And I was raised in Las Vegas in the U.S. So,
yeah, looking at this video feed, I can tell you got a little Adonis in you. I can tell, man, looking good, bro.
No.
No.
Just the hair is quickly departing my head. So, and if I were to shave this beard off, it would be bad news.
Oh gosh, I get you, man. I feel you. We had the conversation prior to the show, and I was like, bro, I totally regret shaving my beard, man. Seeing this double chin popping out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I was listening to your show, Intelligent Design Collective, and it's really, really digestible episodes. I know there's longer episodes available for those people who want to support the show, but some of those episodes, just those standalones, those 24-minute ones, those tiny ones, have a lot of good juice. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, wow, this is good stuff in and of itself. And the reason it caught my attention was because many years ago, I saw a documentary about intelligent design, and if people don't know what that means, we'll discuss that. Don't worry. But before we get into all of that stuff, please let the folks know a little bit about you, Aleko, and I really like your story about how you said, you know, you had some difficulties in the past when you were young with being a kind of agnostic, and now you're on a whole different path with your podcast. You're obviously not agnostic with it if you listen to the show. So how was that journey, man? How did you go from being agnostic to now making a show and trying to make people understand that God is who we should be believing in, and just really just kind of expanding that subject in many ways?
Yeah, well, I would start by saying, maybe quoting one of my favorite apologists, and saying, if a superficial glance at the facts or a momentary interaction with God doesn't lead you into obsession, then I would argue that you haven't been paying attention. So it's, you know, there's some amazing stuff out there. And you know, I was I was brought up in a Greek Orthodox household, which means my father was a humanist / atheist, and my mother was a spiritualist, but she didn't, you know, but they were a prominent family. My father owned what was at the time the oldest privately owned neon sign company in Las Vegas, and it wasn't Yesco, for anyone who might be Googling it. Yesco is a public company, but it's gone now. I mean, he passed away a few years ago, but more or less, you know, his God was money, and was you know, he encouraged us to do all the wrong things. I remember we would show up. He would make sure we were dressed to the nines when we would go to Greek church, you know, on Christmas and Easter. What's the term for that? CEO, Christmas and Easter only Christians. So, yeah. So we would,
Nice.
you know, we have to be dressed up in our suits, you know, some nice cologne and really
at
nice
you.
watch on. But you know, anything else would, you know, that anything more than that, it was he would be like, don't be a fanatic. Stay away
Right.
from religion. It's, you know, good for promulgating, Greek culture and family culture, but not, don't get too into the Jesus thing. So, naturally, when we were teenagers, we didn't really, it was there in the background, the way it is with a Catholic, there are some similarities, some parallels there, where it's a cultural moray, and it kind of sits in your head, but you're not exactly seeking Christ for advice on anything.
Right.
And as I got into school, that devolved, so I studied biochemistry, and then I had kind of a strange career path where I took a step back when my father passed, and I went traveling. Traveled everywhere from India to Indonesia to Thailand, you name it, across Europe, little bits of the outside of Africa. I did my master's degree in England, which is where I met my wife. But quite frankly, like I was open-minded, but I still found difficulty reconciling the biblical story with science and how that worked.
Yeah, because it's usually thought. I just heard actually that what you just said. I just heard just a couple weeks ago. I was at my martial arts class with my daughter, and she was having a conversation with a fellow young girl her age, around 15 years old. She was like 16 or 17. And, they kind of say, well, they were talking about the Bible and science and just the whole general subject. And usually it came from her mouth. And the girl my daughter was talking to were like, oh, the Bible and science are two worlds apart. They have nothing to do with each other, right? And that's kind of the general thought for most people, right?
Well, I would say that's kind of old hat now. So,
right.
I think in the late 90s and early 2000s especially, there was a really stark descent into atheism with you had people the likes of Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harrison. I always forget who the fourth horseman was. They called him the Four Horsemen.
Yes, yeah.
But there was this real pop culture movement of diving into atheism, and anything outside of that is. But what I found really interesting is there has been a big movement and push back towards spiritualism. So what I would call maybe the middle of the aisle, where people are dabbling in all kinds of things, and a lot of it I think is the occult. But you've got things that are sort of undeniable nowadays, that are quantifiable, that are being put into medical journals, like NDEs, near-death experiences. I'm sure you've encountered that before. You've got NDEs, you've got UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. You've got there's all kinds of things, especially in quantum science as well. The concept of an atom being mostly empty space, being bound by the electromagnetic force, and the non-locality of atoms. So if you were to take the material all around you, anything in the material universe, and take the basic building blocks of it, like an atom, you can only divide it so far. You could only go down to about Planck length, which is 10 to the minus, I always get this wrong, 10 to the minus 43. So the point is, it used to be thought that you could divide matter infinitely. You just keep on going smaller and smaller and smaller. But at a certain point, the matter loses locality. It doesn't exist anymore. And what that leads you to is a more advanced version of simulation theory, that the world around us is just an electromagnetic thought. It doesn't really, it's not there.
Right.
And so, you can take that and you sort of, you tether that to some other things, and you start getting some interesting concepts going. You get like, for example, the double slit experiment. And I'll just give a superficial sort of overview of that, but more or less, this has been replicated a number of times, and you can go on YouTube and see, this is, secular scientists doing this. When you take a photon, a basic unit of light, and you shoot it at a wall, if a human is observing it, it will do one thing. And if a human is not observing it, it will do another thing.
Right.
And it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the $1 version of it. And this happens over and over again, and they can't quite figure out what the
just the observing of it itself changes the reality of it, right?
Yes. And what scientists want to know is, what is the relationship between the mind and light, and does that happen with other matter as well? Excuse me. So we know we know that the world is an unusual place, and we know that it has unusual properties. And there's this push toward spiritualism, because people are starting to think, well, maybe there's something else beyond the veil.
Right.
And so I think that, the atheism that you saw, especially in the late 90s, where there's just a lot of mockery going on, that was, pushed by, Michio Kaku and Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was big more in the 70s and 80s. There's people are starting to walk away from that and to get into spiritualism more. And
is that where you were?
No, I don't know where I was. I can't say that I didn't pray, because I did from time to time, but I never saw answers to those prayers.
What was the defining thing that kind of changed you from agnostic to saying, like, no, there's a creator, there's a designer? Like, what really pushed you towards that?
Asking him.
Oh, I see.
So I
Nice.
I was I was probably about an hour outside of Wuhan, China, and I actually lived there for a while. And a guy nearly ran my wife over with his car. I'm not going to get into stereotypes about driving, but it's not too great in certain parts of the world. So
right.
But that being said, I think in Greece, my father's home country, it's supposed to be pretty bad as well. So I can't do that. But that being said, he nearly killed her, and she was. I mean, yeah, it was pretty crazy. She was shook up, but I may have gotten physically aggressive with him.
Right.
But it turns out, and I was telling some friends this last night, it turns out, China is a lot like the Jackie Chan movies, from back in the day. And it's not that, or, the old Kung Fu movies, not just Jackie Chan, but the old Kung Fu movies, like, and it's not that people know Kung Fu, but if there's ever a fight, 50 friends will go and grab gardening tools and will try to attack you.
I see.
So, sure enough, this guy, one of his cronies, well, he was being unpleasant with my wife, and that's why I got physical with him.
Right.
And one of his cronies went and got it wasn't a knife, it was some type of gardening tool, and he stabbed me in the back twice. And the thing was, it was my brother was a Marine. He served in Afghanistan, and he told me, it was really interesting. Like, I've broken things before, and I've gotten pretty nasty cuts, and those felt way worse. And according to him, evidently, when you get a real nasty wound, like a gunshot or a stab wound, it doesn't feel like, it feels like more like a thud, like somebody maybe kicked you or something. You know what I mean? You don't know that you've been damaged that badly. So I just told, I didn't know what had happened to me, and I told my wife, I said, let's just get out of here before this escalates anymore. And my shorts felt wet all of a sudden. Ooh. Yeah, and it was behind me. So he stabbed me in the back. So I put my hand on my shorts, and there was blood, and I was bleeding out very quickly. And my wife, I haven't gotten into this too much, but her family went from cult to some of the most incredible Christians I've ever met in my life. Mm. She started praying about it. And in China, there's this thing called the, I don't recall the name in Chinese, but there's basically there's this law that says that if you help somebody who's in need, you're going to have to pay for them. Ooh. So there's this very odd thing. I suppose you have to know the context so you know the significance of this, but there's this very odd thing where you would see bodies just lying in the ground and nobody would come up and talk to them. Nobody would come up and help them.
You know what? That makes so much sense now, because I've seen so many videos, at the old cult I used to go to, about how heartless the world was becoming. And almost always it was like a Chinese video, and someone would get run over and they would just walk right over him, like, oh, no,
yes.
We keep moving.
Yes.
Yes.
And, I can't speak to that. I know there's a number of different things that go into that, but the number of times we saw people just get hit by cars and people would just walk around them. But if your family member's nearby, obviously, they'll come to the aid, or sometimes the friends will. But if it's a stranger, I can recall somebody taking some cooking oil from a local restaurant and just spilling it in the street. And I was riding my bike to the international school that I was an administrator of, and my bike just slid out from under me, and I hit the ground. I was fine, but I just hit the ground really hard. And I have this really funny memory of this man just standing over me, smoking a cigarette and looking me in the eyes, not asking me if I was okay, just like, I mean, my elbow was pretty beat up, but so it's a really odd thing. But so I suppose the next part of the story, the significance of it is my wife started praying, and out of nowhere, this man on a three-wheeled, I guess you'd call it like motorcycle, but it had sort of almost like a truck bed that they use in Asia. He just pulled up and gestured me to get into the vehicle. So that right there was kind of an unusual,
right? That's definitely an anomaly, at least, you know.
Yeah. So he drove me up to a hospital, and I sincerely believe God hates pride, and I think that it's an abysmal sin in His sight, and so I think it was my pride that got me involved in that fight. So I tend to think that God has a sense of humor, and I don't mean to be irreverent toward God or say anything about Him,
right.
But they essentially pulled down my pants in public and put me on a gurney and started wheeling me around the hospital.
Ooh,
and
very
all of
humbling.
the teachers who were, so all the teachers, well, I suppose there was so much blood they didn't know where the wound came from. So all the teachers who were working under me were showing up. Hey, Aleko, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. How does my ass look? Just like my big white ass, just like being shoved around. So they stopped the bleeding, mind you. I wasn't bleeding anymore. They put pressure on it, whatever. But they're just kind of, it must have taken 20 minutes before they got me into a CT scan so they could see how deep the wound was, and I think it was about 3 inches.
Wow.
They stitched me up. Thank God there was no internal damage. I think it was just very lucky.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
It got to the point where my heart was pounding, which is it's normally a sign that you've lost a lot of blood.
Right.
So I don't know how much I lost, but it was a lot. And I spent the night. A Chinese guard came into our room. He had you don't often see Chinese police with pistols, but he had a pistol on his side, and he was just keeping the press out. You could see there was a ton of people because it was a city of like a small Chinese city is like 5 million. That's a small Chinese city. So it was we knew that there were like maybe in the ballpark of 10 to 15 registered foreign expats there. So there's only 15 foreigners, foreign people from other countries. So it was a big deal that a Laowai, like a white guy like me, was something crazy happened. So they all wanted to come and talk. Communist guard said no, thank you. You're staying out. So we didn't know what was going to happen.
Good example of controlling the media, straight up.
Yes. So yeah, we didn't know what was going to happen. We were a little bit worried. We're like, okay, so when I come to, is this guy putting me in a gulag or something? What's going to happen? So the next day, they just let us go. I guess technically I should have been in bed at the hospital, but we just went home and recovered there for a month. I was just lying face down. But there's this old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes. And I just decided to ask God. I said, it was maybe a few days into it. I don't want to misremember it, but I just said, look, God, if you're real, maybe could you give me something to work with here, some clear evidence of it, because whatever the prayer was, it was just something to that effect. And the next day, apropos of nothing, just she wasn't aware of the prayer. My mother-in-law sent me a book on intelligent design. So I also sincerely believe one of God's signatures is timing.
Right.
So something that seems really ordinary or maybe isn't that special to anyone else, sometimes the timing of it in your life is absolutely incredible. The
specificity to what's happening in your life is amazing. Yes. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow,
yes.
That's crazy. So she sent that to you, and you read that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I read it, and sorry.
No, I'm just saying. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think the connection's a little odd. Yeah, but So I read it, and I thought, okay, this is pretty interesting, and I had a whole month on my face, basically, where I was just kind of had a pillow under me so I could read the entire time, and I happened to just download a few more. I went looking for other books. So everything from Walt Brown in the beginning to Lee Strobel, Case for Christ back in 2012. Yeah, and I liked what I was reading. But that led to the next big event in my life. I had moved to what was the military capital of China, in Dalian, and this is about a year and a half later. I had some really bad stomach pains. Might have been food poisoning, but more or less, I hadn't been able to eat in 24 hours. It was really bad, and I had started incrementally, putting more Christian influence into my life, and I was listening to a couple of pastors at the time, and one of them talked about something that I had never heard in the Greek Orthodox Church, which was the laying on of hands, or speaking faith over something. And I had this stomach ache. I wasn't able to eat anything all day. I thought, well, maybe I could give that a try. And my wife had gone to take a shower, and I thought, okay, so I don't want to embarrass myself in front of anyone. I'm just going to go in the bedroom when she's taking a shower, and I'll lay hands on my stomach, and maybe something will happen. And I did that. I went to the bedroom. I said a prayer first, and then I laid hands on my stomach, and then it was healed instantly. Instantly. I hadn't been able to stomach anything, and then all of a sudden I'm just eating all the cheese in the house. So
wow, you went straight to cheese. Look at you.
That stuff is worth its weight in gold in China. You can't find it that easily.
Yeah,
so,
wow.
Yeah. But yeah, that was essentially it. And that right there is what led to, and I don't mean to, I know I'm being very long-winded here, but that was what led to the next event, which was I felt it on my heart to become an apologist several years later. And I went to a park and I prayed about it. And I said, God, look, I'm an idiot. Just give me a clear answer here. Make it very obvious. If it could be vanity, it could be pride, saying, hey, you need to be an apologist. Right. Just ego, ego getting involved. And I said, just make it clear. So I was at this park late at night, and it was in Southern California, actually. In goodness, where was it? It was in Irvine, I think. In Irvine,
it's about 30 minutes from me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just taking a break from Asia, just had come back to California. And I said this prayer, and I got in my car, and the first thing I heard was it was like a Charles Stanley sermon where he was talking about how all believers need to defend the faith. And, that means defend the faith. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But I said another prayer after that. I said, God, could you make it more clear than that? Because that could be a coincidence. So the next
you sound
morning,
like me, man. Like every time God tells me something, I'm like, yeah, let's do it again. Can you confirm one more time though? You know what I mean?
Precisely. Yeah. So, from there, I went home. I went to bed, and the next morning, my wife says to me, "Oh, Liam, my nephew in England, who's a friend of mine. He just wrote. He's a major contributor to the Intelligent Design Collective podcast, by the way, and he just graduated from Cambridge with, I think he studied primatology, so studied primates and all that. He just wrote, and I said, okay, that's interesting. Liam wrote. So what he said, and she said, well. He says you should become an apologist. He said they're the new rock stars. That's the new counterculture.
Jeez, it doesn't get any more specific than that, man.
Yes. And I said, okay, well, God knows I'm an idiot, so he said it loud and clear. So, and that was how the book began. I began writing it about, and I've been gathering things, work on it for about, the better part of a decade, but the real hard writing on it began about 3 years ago. So
I started listening to the show, and so are you actually writing a hard copy here of like intelligent design information, or is it just an audio version? Because I've only heard about 4 or 5 episodes, and I think you just kind of message it in passing, and it seems like you're building a lot of information from different sources to make this book.
Yeah, it's a cumulative inductive case. So. It's there is going to be a hard copy. God allowing, it's going to be published. In fact, we were ready to publish about a week ago, but we decided we wanted to make some major changes. Sometimes you get cold feet, and you're like, I think this thing could be better. So we're planning to put it out on Audible first, and then get it on Kindle hopefully soon after that. But you can listen to it on the podcast for free, a rough version of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, for people that might not know, we're already like 30 minutes in, but what is intelligent design? What does that look like what does that mean? Just as its basic definition, and why is it such a controversial topic, especially in the science community?
Sure. Well, intelligent design is, I mean, the most basic way I could define it, I suppose, is seeing design in elements of biology and for most of science, seeing elements of design in the entire cosmos, the material cosmos. And I think that that's probably not a textbook definition. That's just one that I would gather based on the books that I've read. And it's controversial because occasionally scientists like to project their own feelings onto the matter and materialist scientists and suggest that, well, what you're doing is reading backwards into science. So you're saying, okay, God exists, and then you're going backwards and you're saying, this is the box I've created, and I want to put science into this box. Mm-hmm. And from some perspectives, if you define science that way, yeah, sure, that could be true. And I don't think that human experience should ever be denied, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I think we're all guilty of that into whatever ideology we subscribe to. We kind of have biases going in, right? And
sure,
so that's like the biggest difficulty to really parse what you believe in versus what you're trying to explain, because that is the hardest part. I mean, we do that as Christians. We do that in the science world, just because it really comes down to what you fundamentally believe, which kind of is the driving force to try and prove whatever it is you're trying to prove, right?
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, materialists or atheist scientists read their presuppositions of materialism into science the same way that any theist would read their beliefs into science. And that's not to say that's what I did. That is definitely a factor. But a lot of scientists, and I guess I'll get into this in a few minutes maybe, a lot of scientists find no conceivable way around the hypercomplexity of something like a prokaryotic cell. And there's no way against the laws of entropy and thermodynamic equilibrium constant that something like that would just pop into existence. So you can go, from my opinion, you can go both ways. You can go from God. If you had a personal experience, put it this way, if you came in from a village in the Amazon and you got, hit by an airplane that fell out of the sky and you survived, you'd want to know where that airplane came from. You'd know that it was there. You'd know that they exist, and you'd have curiosity about it, and you'd want to fit that your paradigm shift would want to, you'd have a cognitive hunger that would be seeking out the answers for why that thing hit you. Mm-hmm. And I think that same thing happens with Christianity. So to deny the human experience, I think is an abject denial of science. But that being said, I understand where they're coming from, and you can still work around it if you want to say, you can work into intelligent design from a zero starting point. But I think also it's not unscientific to hope for a conclusion. Your data has to be objective, but the scientist doesn't have to be objective, or your analysis of that data. So, for example, disease and cancer researchers, they're hoping for a conclusion with what they're doing. People that are searching for extraterrestrial life, they are hoping for a conclusion. You just have to be honest about the way you extrapolate data.
Yeah. So going back to the reason why this might be so controversial, intelligent design is proposing that pretty much what we experience in our existence, whether it's biological, chemical, even within the cosmos, as you mentioned, the cosmology of the world, all of that, according to most scientists, comes from the Big Bang or the Big Bang, which leads to the evolutionary theory. From my understanding, there is different versions of evolution, right? I don't know too much, but if you know them, can you mention them? But that's why it's such a controversy, if I'm not mistaken. It's because we are proposing that there's a designer, and then I guess back, like you said, maybe in the 90s or the early 2000s, it was much more of a controversy because, in a sense, they're already trying to say, oh, what you're saying is God did this, and they're not willing to put the God creator into this, right? Is that one of the reasons it's so controversial?
Yes. Well, I would ask you, how far into this do you want to go? So, because I can get into the weeds. I don't have to use highly technical words. I can keep it pretty layman if you want to do that. Or
absolutely, yeah, no weeds. Let's weed whack this thing, man.
All right. So the theory of evolution stems from the presupposition that life existed at some point. So life already exists, and then evolution, you're already assuming that life popped into existence from nothing. And right there, you have your first problem. So there's three predominant theories on how life came to Earth. There's biogenesis, which is intelligent design, abiogenesis, which means it just came from a highly advantageous primordial soup, and then you have panspermia, which is, life. The Earth was seeded with life from maybe a meteor, maybe an alien race. But when you think about it, panspermia is still biogenesis because it still came from another life. Right. Biogenesis essentially means life comes from life.
There's still an origin to those, right? And it's like I think Prometheus, the movie, kind of brought that question up pretty clearly. What's like, well, they these ancient civilizations seeded us here, and it's like, but who created them? Like, that's still the same question,
Yes. So, I'll get into the weeds here. So, for me, it starts with philosopher William Paley's watchmaker argument, which has been popularized among some people. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it only because of your show, but I'm not. I don't know all the details.
Okay, so this is a touch of philosophy, but quite frankly, you have to get into philosophy in order to analyze some of these facts.
Right.
So it was British philosopher and theologian William Paley. He said, if you come across a watch sitting in the sand at the beach and you start considering its origins, when you're analyzing it, your first assumption would probably not be that over millions of years and through chance processes, atoms spontaneously gathered through a lineage of random mutations and environmental adaptations. So this is natural human intuition, right? So we'd also not assume that the watch had ancient ancestors which formed self-replicating cells that then bunched into more complex forms and eventually advanced on dividing in asexual reproduction. A person observing would also probably find it hard to believe that the watch sitting on the beach was the product of sexual reproduction between two other slightly less advanced watches. And I'm pulling this directly from my book just so I don't get it. I want to make sure I get everything in here. But so without question, many will acknowledge that the watch, which is filled with cogs, watch hands, numbers, a steel casing, as some type of power source, falling together by complete accident or natural randomness is absurd. Okay, but what is fascinating is that the people that would view that as silly still believe that the human wrist that a watch would be resting on is an evolutionary accident. But it's exponentially more complicated when you consider it. So the watch would be what would be referred to as an open loop system in engineering. An open loop system has only a few controls or feedback items integrated into its design. And these are typically used to tweak activity variables. So like you would change the time on the watch, right, in order to promote preferred efficiency of the item. So an open loop system. Okay, so let me. I'm losing my place here. So another example of an open loop system would be like a washing machine. So depending upon the quantity of the garments that you put in or how dirty they are, a user or operator could adjust the controls to put a particular length of time or intensity in order to generate desired output. You tweak it basically, but it has no real awareness of how dirty or clean the clothes are and how long it needs to do anything. It's just you're the one controlling it, right? So that's the watch, right? So, and I put in my notes here, most importantly, the washing machine, it needs repair. It's not self-aware. And even if it has like a kind of advanced computer on it, it doesn't know what's going on really.
Right.
And it doesn't legitimately know if the clothes are clean or not. But the wrist that the watch will be resting on is what you would call a hyper-complex closed-loop engineering system. So a closed-loop system is generally defined as a mechanical device that has self-regulation over one or multiple variables in its operation process, mostly without control or interaction or input. And they vary from open-loop systems because they typically have both hardware, so moving components, like right. In the wrist, it would be like you've got blood, you've got cells moving around, you've got all kinds of things going on. And software, which controls the measures operations to maintain desired output. So the software would be like your brain. So closed loop systems are very challenging to create and typically can be far from flawless. And an example of this would be like opening a window near an advanced thermostat. It's like a simple closed loop design during winter, causing the room to overheat. So if it has a sensor on it, it'll do something basically. So in the case of the wrist, what is observed is a closed loop system that it can adapt to ambient conditions. So your skin can tighten if it gets cold outside in order to preserve heat, right? It can fight off potential invaders at the cellular level. It's largely self-maintaining. It's controlled by software, so in this case, the human consciousness. From an engineering perspective, the wrist is many orders of magnitude more complex than the watch. Right. And more baffling would be the notion of, an eye falling together by evolutionary accident. So the wrist isn't even a complex part of the body. The eye is there's no getting into it. It's right. Exquisite from a design perspective.
Right.
So even over millions of years, something like this happening is what we would consider absurd. But many biologists. Oh, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
No, let me stop you there. So, yeah. I had this argument many years ago with a chemist. She had a master's in biochemistry or something like that here in the city of Laverne. And, I was just working my job. I work for Coca-Cola. I'm just, regular guy, but I was looking into these sorts of things. And she worked at one of the stores that I serviced, but she was kind of like, already leaving, an older lady. And we had conversations about, creation and evolution and things like that. And I brought up exactly this situation that you're bringing up right now, because what you're saying is, about the watch and the washer machine, those things, we would never say that they were just, we would never say, for example, I blew up some shards of metal, and then the shards of metal just over time turned into a highly mechanical watch or something like that, right? And I think the argument I used with her is like, I would never blow up an alphabet and it would come back to be a dictionary, you know what I mean? And things like that, because the human body, and like you said, the human eye is infinitely more complex than any of these things I just mentioned, whether it's a dictionary, a clock, a washer machine, all these things. And the what it takes to make the human body mechanically work is absurd to say that happened out of this big bang and it just happened, primordial soup or whatever you want. There's just no explanation to really just define, or I don't know what the word is, to show how complex we are. And I think people buy that kind of story because they misunderstand the complexity of the human body. They misunderstand. And I think, and when I said that to her, her argument was, well, it didn't just happen with the explosion. It happened over millions of years. We need millions of years for this to happen. And what do you say to that? Like when someone tells you the argument is, well, we need the time. That's why we need the billions of years or whatever amount of years since the Big Bang in order for this to work.
So whenever science encounters a problem that's kind of unsolvable, they throw time at it. They throw a lot of time at it, and they say, well, or quantities. So, for example, our life or our universe has fine-tuning, anthropic principle, and it's fine-tuning that is just insane. So the unlikeliness of that is pretty high. So they just say, well, we have infinite universes, right?
Right.
So the human body or life in general is hyper complex. So they just say, well, there's a lot of time. Throw eons at it, and that's how you solve the problem. The only issue is it was Richard Dawkins who said that when you all things considered, evolution is the most elegant solution that we have for the complexity of life that we see today. But the problem is, that's true only when you're taking biology in a microcosm. When you conflate it with other realms of science, so when you use things like physics and chemistry, that's when the whole theory falls apart completely. Yeah. So when you consider, just take, for example, entropy laws, right? So, when you take we take into consideration that all things in the universe, the material universe, are dissolving. They fall to entropy, right? They're falling apart. Order coming out of that chaos is not something that would be congruent with what we've witnessed in the rest of the universe. So a life form spawning from the disintegration of the material world is not going to be something that happens, even if you throw millions of years at it. And there have been physicists like Brian Cox and Brian Greene, who have said, well, maybe we had things like pockets of order where entropy stopped for a minute and then all of a sudden, boom, life, right? But something like that happen has never been witnessed, so it's just conjecture. You're delving into imagination when you go that route.
Isn't one of the biggest problems is that the evolutionary theory in and of itself does not follow the scientific method of observable evidence? Isn't that one of the issues?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, and there's a number of reasons why that is. So maybe I won't go into detail too much, but I'll give you more of an overview. So evolution, okay, I told you my nephew just finished his primatology work at Cambridge, right? And he was talking about evolution because what he is a an evolutionary theist. So he's a bit like Francis Collins, who wrote goodness, what book did he write recently? Who believes in he's a Christian, but he was responsible for a lot of the work on the Human Genome Project. And he thinks that Christ is real, but he somehow tries to reconcile evolution and Christianity, right? So the only issue with evolution is we don't really know what happened, right? So we have these things like intermediaries, right? So all these stepping stones, and you go into any museum across the world and you'll see like cavemen, basically, right? But the issue is a lot of these intermediaries have been falsified, right? So or there's some sort of great exaggeration. So taken from Walt Brown, who's a physicist at MIT, taken from his book. I'll go through a couple of these. Piltdown Man was a hoax, but was in textbooks for over 40 years, sorry. Rampithecus, which was limited to a few teeth and jaw fragments. The fragments were assembled incorrectly by Louis Lequier to look like a human jaw, but it was merely an ape. Nebraska Man was a pig's tooth, and Eugene Dubois admitted that Java Man was likely a large gibbon or like a monkey. Right. Also conceding that he purposely withheld parts of 4 other thigh bones of primates found in the same area in order to gain notoriety for his claim. Peking Man, which was in China. I always found Chinese claims about science to be quite funny because they would make the loftiest claims, but they wouldn't allow anyone to inspect, right? So Peking Man, the oft-spoken about very dodgy intermediary claimed by China, turned out to be an ape that was systematically decapitated and used for food like a real human. And many experts consider the categorization of Homo erectus to be a fallacy. Homo habilis, the Lucy fossil, and Neanderthal man some of them have been debunked, but a lot of them are greatly refuted because, what you've got there is scientists seeking notoriety.
Right.
And, I bring this up with my classes, like, why would scientists lie? Science is supposed to be objective, or why would they exaggerate something? And by instinct, by intuition, they naturally always come to the correct conclusion. Money, right? You get funding, right? You get funding. Or notoriety, and notoriety goes back to money, right? Right. So that's why you get scientists today who are claiming that we've definitively found a planet that's in the Goldilocks zone in X, Y, or Z system. Right. The planets that I think are most popular are Kepler 186f and TRAPPIST-1d, right? Right. Which could be real. I mean, it could be true. And as a real astronomy enthusiast, I'm thrilled by the fact that they're even looking, right? I think that's exciting. But using Doppler effect, which is extremely limited, considering gravitational lensing. So the idea that a planet can distort the view around it because of the gravitational pull. Variable speed of light theory. It's a little complicated, but there's this theory that light speed is not always a constant. And human instrument limitations. We're telling people that we found these planets in Goldilocks zones, but we just accurately measured the diameter of Pluto this decade. So Pluto, a dwarf planet in our own system, we just accurately measured that, but we're telling people
and they're debating on whether it's a planet or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we're giving people these big, lofty, like, we found this thing in this place, not even in our solar system, but we just accurately measured.
Or let's take it back home. We don't even know what's at the deepest parts of our oceans. You know what I mean? Like, geez.
Oh, yeah. Yes. That's crazy. Yeah, there's some crazy stuff there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Before we move on, because there's so much to get into, I just kind of want to give an example to people, the difficulty and the complexity of just assembling one protein of the human body, like one protein, just to get that one supposed protein that replicates itself. And that, according to the idea that there was that one protein in primordial soup, and then that was the beginning of evolution. Just how difficult that is. This is an interesting little cartoon bit on this documentary, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. I want people to hear. It's kind of funny. Here we go.
Show of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I'm spinning one of those casino thingies. What are they called?
Yes.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature.
Richard Duck.
Do your thing. You stupid machine. I hate you.
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable. Roughly 1 in a trillion.
Let all of life choose a million, a trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. Luckily, some serious scientific minds have figured out a way to beat the odds.
Directed panspermia.
Yeah. So, yeah. Obviously, there it's kind of being a little silly, but in order for the one perfectly aligned protein to be in place, you have to win a casino game 250 times, which the odds of that is, as he was saying, in a trillion. Like, it's just the ridiculous odds for one protein to be aligned perfectly. Now, let alone I don't know how many billions or whatever amount we have in our body for us to work, so it just gives you some perspective of just how difficult it would be. And so one of the things they throw at it, like you said, if they can't figure it out, they throw a lot of time, or they throw this idea of panspermia, which is, hey man, some aliens put us here, man. It was the Scientology stuff. Maybe there was an explosion, their DNA mixed with, some Neanderthal or whatever, and boom, we got humans, or maybe it was genetically modified intentionally, things like that. There's all these stories, right? And so does your book dive into any of the panspermia stuff at all?
It talks about it a little bit. It was Francis Crick who he didn't come up with panspermia. He was the gentleman who discovered DNA, but he popularized it. And he basically came up with this idea of panspermia because he's like, look, he has a quote. You could probably Google it. It was something like, the gist of it was, the things that which would have had to have come together in order to assemble a DNA by accident, a strand of DNA or life, it would have essentially had to have been a miracle. And so that's why that's sort of a distillation of what he said. You can find the exact quote, I'm assuming, by Google, but he more or less said, he was an atheist, by the way, and what he did was throw more time at it. And he suggested that even the time that we have been here on Earth wouldn't have been enough time to produce DNA. So something panspermia, it came from somewhere else, defer the problem. It's like sweeping the problem under the rug, or it's like an endless series of IOUs without any cash to back up the IOUs, essentially. Mm-hmm. So DNA is a really interesting thing. It's never becomes more complex or adds greater viability. So when you talk about animals coming from other animals, we've never witnessed at the microscopic scale DNA adding more information to itself, and it acts like a quaternary computer code, right? It's this hyper complex thing that dictates the order of everything in your life. But we do see DNA becoming less effective. So we do see things like people ask, okay, well, how do you get humans with different color skin? How do you get animals that look like different types of animals? How do you get these variations among species?
Or
right?
As they say, different ethnicities have different traits on their body. Black people with, obviously this is not a racist thing. It's just a real thing.
Sure,
They have different noses. They have different skin. They have different hair. Same thing with Mexicans, like the true Mexicans. They're like the natives. They're hairless. They have this thick black hair. And, they're just kind of adapting or you could say evolving to their environment. So, like, you know, that's kind of one of the arguments. Oh, there's evolution proof right there. But I don't really think that's a proof of evolution, though.
So yeah, what we see is that would, I mean, some people refer to that as microevolution. Some call it adaptation response. But what's interesting about that is when we see changes within a species. So we'll take a polar bear, for example. Polar bears, you know, supposedly came from grizzly bears, right? And we have scientific evidence of that. So one of the genes that allows for fat metabolism, the APOB gene, shuts down in certain parts of its sequencing in order to allow for that fat metabolism, because, you know, the polar bear has to consume more food and, you know, provide for a longer winter, you know, for a harsher environment. It has to have more blubber to keep it warm. So the DNA that would allow for that actually becomes less viable. So when we see mutation, it's never a positive thing. Oh, sorry, excuse me, I'll take that back. It's either a neutral thing or it's a negative thing, like cancer or disease. So the DNA mutates, you've got a disease, you've got cancer, or part of the efficacy of that DNA is not there anymore, which, you know, on a macro scale can lead to good things. So, okay, this bear's gene partially shut down in order to allow it to metabolize fat in a different way so that it could survive in a different environment. Okay, great. But we've never observed in a laboratory DNA becoming more complex. And when I say more complex, I'm talking about a fin turning into a wing. I'm talking about, you know, a short-necked giraffe all of a sudden having a long neck because it was reaching for higher leaves. And that, by the way, is called Lamarckism. So, you know, we don't see Lamarckism at the microscopic scale. And, you know, there's a bodybuilder who acquires really big muscles is not going to pass those muscles on to his child. It's a common misconception that a lot of people have, but it doesn't happen that way. But we do see things that allow for. So let's just say you take this at face value and you do believe there's a creator, right? Why would a creator put his life on Earth without the ability to adapt to their environment? Why would he make them stagnate? You know. He essentially created a supercomputer that can adapt to any environment. But the concept
that's a good way to put it. Actually, that's never thought of it that way. We're like a adaptable, in a sense. I don't want to dilute human existence, but in a sense, we're like a super awesome, adaptable artificial intelligence in a sense compared to God. Like we're just like made in His image, you know. Precisely.
So yeah, I feel like I've been hogging the microphone here for a while.
No. You're doing quite well, because anything I say, it comes from a place of just what I've learned from either listening to people like yourself or different things like that. But you're doing the research, so it's best that you babble on. Matter of fact, I have listeners that complain because I babble too much, and they said they'll send me emails saying, I thought you were gonna let him speak. You know what I mean? And so so I tend to babble on myself. You know what I mean? So I have no problem with you taking the mic, you know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
And so, okay.
Oh, well, you know, there's a couple other things. Oh, sorry, go on, yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish that thought, and then I'll get into something else.
There's a couple other things, if people are willing to look into it. I don't know if I'll touch on these, but worth looking into if they get a chance. You know, Haeckel's embryos. This is something that you know I've seen. So there's a number of, and we were talking about, you know, sensationalism in science and people doing things that, you know, is absolute nonsense, that is kept in textbooks. So there's the intermediaries. So we just talked about some of the intermediaries that are missing, like these cavemen essentially. And what is really found is a skull fragment or a tooth. And then you go to the Natural History Museum and you see this beautiful image of a caveman that was built around this skull fragment and a tooth. And it's quite obviously not a caveman. It's something else, like a gibbon or whatever. But you also see this sensationalism in things that were information that was produced decades ago that is still reproduced in biology textbooks. So one of them is Ernst Haeckel's embryo. So there's this, I don't recall what his discipline was, but he was a scientist and he was studying embryology, right? And he sketched these embryos with gills in them. So, and I remember my mom talking to me about this in the 90s, like, well, the reason we know evolution is true is because, you know, if you look at, there's what we call analogous structures. So if you look at embryos when they're in the womb of anything, so fish, horse, human, they all kind of look the same and they all have gills, which means we came from fish. But nothing could be further from the truth. They're just analogous ridges. They're meaningless. They're not tied to the respiratory system. But Ernst Haeckel drew them with gills. And this was over a century ago. and it was disproved, I think, 4 or 5 decades ago. This is, these were not gills. He was clearly just making this up, and he got a lot of money and a lot of notoriety for this. But if you open a textbook today, you'll see some reference to it, like, hey, embryos, they have something like gills, so that's how we know that we're all fish at one point. It's analogous structures, and what I commonly say to analogous structures. So a monkey has lungs, humans have lungs. Sharks have gills. Smaller fish have gills, right? So what I commonly say to analogous structures is common descent or common designer, right? This provides no evidence of interchangeability between the species, like they went from one species to another. We know that that's not possible at the DNA level, but we also know that some of these claims are greatly exaggerated. Okay,
Right.
okay, I'll get off the
No worries, not at all. That's not a soapbox at all. Like you're answering a lot of questions that I actually have, and as you're speaking, you're just kind of answering the questions I had anyway. So we're flowing. We're doing good.
Okay, yeah, sure.
We're doing good.
Sure.
I want to get a question across. One of our listeners sent it, and you kind of answered it already, but I also want to get your experience of it because in one of your episodes, I think you talked about the flood. And that you said you used to kind of believe that the Old Testament was maybe perhaps more allegorical, and it had served its purpose as allegories and things like that. But then you started thinking, maybe leaning towards, no, these are more historical, factual events, and maybe more literal.
Yeah.
Definitely in the world of Christianity, there's probably a variety of people that lean towards one or the other. They're either staunchly they're a literalist, or they're not so much a literalist, or in the middle somewhere, or like you said, they're allegories. Sure. Especially if they read the Joshua stories, the giant stories, they're like, oh no, those are just allegories. That being said, you said that your nephew, I believe, kind of tries to introduce kind of the evolutionary perspective into it. Now, does people like that? Do you know people like that believe like in the Big Bang or in the evolutionary theory, and are also Christians or theists? The question he asked, it says, I was just wondering, how does one believe in the Big Bang and evolution, and how does that affect you as a Christian, the view of the whole gospel? Does it affect it if you believe in the Big Bang and evolution, but also in the Genesis narrative? Like, how do you reconcile that? You know what I mean?
Sure. So, I mean, there are reasons for assuming the Big Bang, and we know that the universe was hot. We know that it's expanding, but the conclusion drawn about the Big Bang is, I think even in the materialist community, it's kind of, it's wavering. So not everyone adheres to that. We know that there's different expansion rates all across the universe. We know that there's, according to Doppler effect, galaxies are traveling in different directions, not unidirectional, and that indicates that there wasn't one origin point of an explosion. But quite frankly, it's a difficult one to speak on, because what we know philosophically speaking, if you get into like the cosmological proof for God, we know that there had to be a starting point, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem with the Big Bang as a starting point is it again defers the answer, right? So the idea of the Big Bang is that there was a big crunch before that, and maybe infinite Big Bangs and big crunches, right? Because if you don't propose that, then where did the material universe come from? Everything that we can touch and feel and see and smell in the universe, it had to come from somewhere. And simply saying that it's just been exploding and contracting over and over again for infinity, it sounds romantic and all, and it looks good in like a Marvel movie or whatever. But
I was going to say the Flash, DC, they love that stuff.
Yeah, but it defers the solution, right? So right. As I said before, with evolution, it's like an endless series of IOUs not backed up by actual money. You're not dealing with the actual origin of that material.
Right. Look, I just had a thought right now. Let me see. Let me put this together so it doesn't come out like I'm a dummy. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I had it right here. I'm gonna edit this part. No worries. So there's no awkward in between,
Yeah, no worries. I'm
just going through these. Okay, like I said, you're kind of answering most of my stuff like right off the bat, just with your kind of like ongoing thing. So it's like cool. Don't need to ask that question. Don't need to ask that question. You know what I mean? But I'm gonna go into another clip.
Sure.
Here we go, and we'll get your thoughts on that. We already listened to that. Okay. Is this the one I wanted? No, you answered that already too.
I apologize.
No, you're doing good. Because like I said, these are, actually love it when that happens. Because like I write down these questions and I don't have to ask them, and they're just done. You know what I mean? And so those are the one of the things. But I think it had to do with simulation theory a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But sound. There we go. All right, Here we go. Here we go. So I just had this thought, and just because I wanted to bring it up, I don't know if you cover it at all in your book, but there seems to be this belief also in the kind of like in the world of physics, or I don't know what part of it. You tell me if you've heard it, but as you said, like atoms, when you start going down into like the molecular level, we find out that there's a lot of space, and there's really, after a while, there's nothingness, And there's this idea, there's this theory that I've heard people that do kind of subscribe to the evolutionary or the Big Bang theory, that when you start breaking apart the Big Bang, and what it actually is, and the energy involved in it, and all the stuff that we can see observable, is really just pointing to the Genesis story and when God spoke, And so they're trying to, I guess, in scientific terms, explain Genesis by saying when God spoke things into existence, the fact that he spoke, and, we're imagining the voice of God himself, we speak, our voice resonates and travels through space or whatever for a long period of time until it dissipates, or maybe it goes on forever. I don't know. But our sound travels, and then obviously it ripples and it creates differences in our space that we live in. And there's just, it gets real sciencey just to talk about sound, right? And there's this belief that it is sound that holds cells together, molecules together. You know what I mean? There's this idea, especially growing in the like you mentioned earlier, in the spiritualist world, where the people that kind of subscribe to New Age kind of ideologies and things like that, where the fact that they can measure sound and everything has its own particular sound wave. We're talking wood, we're talking humans, we're talking mushrooms. They'll connect like sound devices to plants, and they actually emanate a specific sound wave. And so the theory is that to those who believe in God and believe in that theory, is that that's, in a sense, we're tapping into or listening to the voice of God himself, like holding creation together. And obviously, it kind of ties into like the sci-fi stuff, because, we understand that there's, when we watch movies, there's like sound wave guns, and a certain sound can just tear you apart if it's not the right sound wave, if it disrupts your specific structure of sound and things like that. Have you heard of anything like that, or touched on that, or any research of that whatsoever in your book?
I haven't. No, I have never heard of the idea of sound holding everything together. I think it's interesting. It sounds very poetic. I think it would be quite fascinating if that were the case. I do believe that the voice is a very important thing. I think that if you're going to get into the scripture, I think that it does say God spoke things into existence, and essentially God created man and woman in his image. And if you look at things that Christ says in the Gospels, he constantly refers to the things that we say being very important, and he says we'll be judged by every single one of them. And I'm of the personal belief that we've been endowed with the ability to bless and curse with our words, and we're never really encouraged to curse. But and what I mean by not in the colloquial sense, but you were able to, if you speak bad to someone, then it's a no. You even hear, oh gosh, and I'm really terrible at quoting biblical scriptures, but there's this reference to Christ saying, basically don't even speak evil of the evil spirits. Don't say bad things about the evil spirits around us.
But there's something very powerful about speaking and the sound and the way we receive it. Like because like, we don't think much of it because we kind of experience it. Like, I heard your voice, you're hearing my voice. You're over there in Vietnam, right? And I'm over here in California, and so we're talking, and you're receiving information. We're agreeing, and it's sparking other ideas, and it sparked new ideas in you just by you receiving this information. You know what I mean? So our brain's processing this sound, and it turns into information, and it digs deeper to find other information that's related to the subject. And it's just like this constant operation of this computer based on sound. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, at least that's one of the things that I'm thinking of sometimes, where it's like, dude, do you have no idea the complexity of the brain and the human mind? Where it's like we're just operating on this literal, and I don't mean this in like a self apotheosis kind of way, but in a God level, because God gave us that ability to do so. Like I was telling my daughter, explaining to her what it means to be created in the image of God, and if people really looked into that according to the Hebrew perspective, it doesn't mean, oh, you look like him, you have feet and you have fingers. It doesn't mean you're this body or whatever. It means you have it's like a title of authority. It's like it's like all these other things that you can do that he did. For example, I gave her an example, like you, because she composes music like myself. Like, before you brought that into existence, you thought it, and you heard this song in your head that doesn't exist, and you put sound together and you made this beautiful song. And you literally brought that out of nothing. Like, it came out of nowhere. And that's something that only God can do. You know what I mean? And he gave you that ability. In a sense, you are reflecting what it means to be in the image of God. And furthermore, to be even more specific, I created her with her mother. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's something God did too. Like, he created us, and we're just creating, and we have this ability to be creators along with him, and so there's this whole scientific aspect that we're participating in constantly, just with existing. And and it's just the fact that we exist as humans, in the way we communicate, the way we create, everything that we do. I mean, buildings, art, whoever made this iPad, like all these things. I mean, it's just like all a testament to how someone thought of it, intelligently designed it, and now we're using it as a tool, and it's like, dude, we're living intelligent design constantly, innovating constantly, yet we don't believe, or there's people that don't subscribe to that idea that there's an intelligent designer. And it's like, dude, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think you've got a really interesting idea. It reminds me a lot of the cosmological proof for God. And I'm very bad at explicating philosophy, but I would recommend, if you want a good summary of it, chapter 6 of Edward Fazer's 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. He gets into the weeds on that, and what he's essentially saying is, in the cosmological proof, which stemmed from Aristotle and then moved on to Aquinas, and then Leibniz, and a few other philosophers in there as well. The idea behind it is God didn't start the universe and then just kind of let it set itself up. And he didn't start the universe and then just kind of tinker with it and adjust the settings and all that. He is, at all times of existence, holding and sustaining everything at every single moment. So every atom in existence is being sustained by the power of God. And that's a difficult thing to summarize, especially for someone like me who's not really well versed in philosophy. But if you want to, it takes about. I had a really great English professor who told me you never really understand a book until you've read it twice. With just that chapter alone, you probably have to read it 3 times, 4 times to kind of grasp the concept. But it's he explains it really, really beautifully. But and that doesn't necessarily tie into your idea about sound. But I think it reminded me of that because at every moment in existence, God is sustaining everything, and that's if you take this at face value, that speaks to his ability. He is literally everywhere, and you can't escape him. So
yeah, absolutely. Now going back to I don't know, I guess I want to give people a little bit more examples as to maybe some things that you'd like to mention that are subscribed to in the evolutionary perspective that are disingenuous. You talked about earlier, which I thought was fascinating. People have been caught lying about, these, the what are they called? The Neanderthal type, or the
intermediaries.
Right. Like anything in between. Right. And so, are there other things that are still kind of pushed and taught today that people don't know and that are just honestly just disingenuous? Like, one of the things I think that people don't realize is just going back to Darwin, what he's claiming to be explaining with his theory isn't the origin of life, right? Like, he's only kind of proving like the evolution of, or not proving, but at least trying to talk about evolutions of species, right?
Yes.
And he never got down to the, hey, where did life start? And people kind of just by consequence kind of put into that's what he's saying, but he never claimed that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Most scientists and philosophers don't want to touch the origin of life with a 10-foot pole, because it's a tough one if you don't involve creator. So Darwin, he makes that very clear. He's just dealing with life once it already arose, but actually attempting to determine where it came from and how it started spontaneously is it's an unfathomable thing. And Darwin at the time, when Darwin wrote his book, he thought, as did most of the scientific world, that the cell was not complex. They thought of it as like an amorphous blob. Or think of like did you ever play with GAC when you were a kid?
Oh, I forgot about GAC.
It always smelled weird, but that's kind of what they thought the cell was like. And he actually says in his work, Darwin said, if it could be proved that at the microscopic level cells are complex, my entire theory will be upended.
Ooh.
And and then you have people like philosopher David Hume, who said, living systems only have the appearance of machines. This was before Darwin. And he suggested that if it could be proven that living systems are machines at the molecular level, then that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Right.
And essentially, soon after Darwin, modern microbiology demonstrated that the simplest organisms, even like prokaryotic organisms like bacteria and things, are complex machines beyond our imaginations.
Right.
So pretty intense.
Yeah, in your studies, there's this kind of stigma that if you are a Christian, you are Republican, or you're a Christian, you are this. I mean, there's like all these ideas already given. And in the science community, from what I can tell, a lot of the times that if you question the narrative of Darwinian evolution, you're immediately questioned in many other ways. I'm going to play this clip and we're going to break it apart a little bit, and we'll talk about that just because I want to expand on this a little bit. Check this out.
When I met evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg in Washington, D.C. His life was nearly ruined when he strayed from the party line while serving as editor of a scientific journal affiliated with the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Your office was over there?
That's correct. This here is the West Wing. Directly ahead of us is the West Wing of the Natural History Museum.
So now you're not there anymore because you're a bad boy.
No, I'm not. No, I was exiled.
You're a bad boy. You question the powers that be. What was Dr. Sternberg's crime? He dared to publish an article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement. The paper ignited a firestorm of controversy merely because it suggested intelligent design might be able to explain how life began. As a result, Dr. Sternberg lost his office, his political and religious beliefs were investigated, and he was pressured to resign.
The questioning of Darwinism was a bridge too far for many. The mentioning of intelligent design that occurs at the end of the paper was over the top. And I think the intelligent design proponents have raised a number of very important questions.
And you wanted to get those questions brought up and discussed.
Placed on the table.
Placed on the table.
People were so upset about it They were so upset that you could see they had a physical emotional reaction.
Wow.
They were saying that Stephen C. Meyer is a well-known Christian, that Stephen C. Meyer is an intelligent design proponent, that Stephen C. Meyer is a Republican. It was all couched in terms of religion, politics, and sociology. The way the chair of the department put it is that I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
Terrorist.
Because of giving the topic of intelligent design some modicum.
Pretty crazy, I think, and I don't know. That's just weird. That's just weird to me. Intellectual terrorist is kind of a strong word for that, but
yes.
But it's insane. And this was a while ago, and apparently, if you haven't, again, this documentary, I'll put it in a link for the people that want to check it out. But it really kind of just opens up the systematic kind of like, what do I want to say? Like they were intentionally trying not to make intelligent design a conversation in the community of like these kind of universities, like and things like that, because it's like because that leads to talking about the creator God, But what I found fascinating is if you touch that, you must be a Christian, you must be a Republican, you must be all these different things. And it's kind of like they just throw the kitchen sink at you, like when they don't like something like as of late, especially with the vaccine stuff happening over here in America. If you don't want to take it immediately, they say, oh, you must be a flat earther too. Like, it's just like there's no middle ground. It's like you're crazy for not agreeing with everyone else with what we're talking about, And it seems that there's this narrative that if you're a Christian, you're an idiot, that you're dumb and that you don't think, and I would argue that that's kind of crazy. You yourself are a Christian, and I think people listening to your show or what you're talking about can kind of quickly surmise that you're definitely not an idiot, to say, the least, but do you find that a lot in your research, that there are just a lot of people that just say, well, you must be kind of dumb, or you're not fully evolved human being if you're a Christian, and that's why you don't believe in evolution?
Well, I think my wife would disagree with you on my intelligence. I think that it's very common. People see this all the time. For others to use distillative tactics or distillation, they try to condense you down into whatever they want to see you as, and there's often conflation as well. I find it really interesting that if you look at the Greek word for devil, diavalos, it means to be of two minds. And so what they tried to do is there's this tactic to make people of two minds about something by conflating one topic with another, or tethering one topic to another, and they'll say, well, the people that believe intelligent design are the ones that were burning witches at the stake 300 years ago. But the problem is there are all these I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one to speak on, because I think there's been a lot of branches of Christianity, and I'm obviously getting out of my wheelhouse here, where I think there have been misinterpretations of the scripture. I think that you obviously grew up with one of those, and then there's a lot. There's history is replete with them, and what I've always kind of thought of that is you have this malevolent force that's kind of behind the scenes, not just one but a lot. The scripture talks about how we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, and that there are principalities and powers everywhere.
Right.
And
I think my biggest thing I want to bring attention to people is that there, in your research, there's a lot of believers. There's a lot of Christians that are physicists, that are astronomers. These are renowned people, like doctorates, and they're trying. They're on your boat, like they're on the same boat, where they're like, no, we have a designer. Like it's not just like Chuck, me who barely graduated high school, trying to prove that God exists to scientists here. Like there's people in the midst of the community that do the hard research and say, no, there's definitely evidence. I think that one of the most fascinating arguments, and I forgot who it was, Dr. Heiser had him on his show on the Naked Bubble podcast, but he's like an expert at knowing what every planet does in our planetary system, and how that in and of itself, the positioning of every single planet, the way it rotates, everything, is ridiculously impossible for us. Like the odds of that happening, and for the sustainability of life on Earth, and the way our planetary system is set up is ridiculous. Like the odds of that in and of itself is insane, and for that to be happening while everything is moving in the midst of space is just insane. Like just the probabilities of that, and so there is a lot of smart intellectual people talking on these subjects, and it's not just Chuck from Fire Theft Radio just trying to prove God is real.
Sure. Yeah. I think what's interesting about that is most research, well, not most, but a lot of research now is pointing to the idea of people naturally believing in God to begin with, but being inculcated the opposite direction. So Dr. Alison Gopnik over at Berkeley, she's at Berkeley, so some real hardcore atheist. She did a study on a group of children, and I don't know what the sample size was, but I'd imagine it was fairly large. She's a prominent researcher. She determined that children as young as 5 begin to invoke a godlike designer to explain the world around them, even if brought up by atheists. And you have to imagine that, especially in the world that she's in that whole region of the United States, it's a very if not atheist, very agnostic, very humanist area of the world where, people are not telling kids, what they believe about God or, and that of course is an assumption. I am leaning on that, but there's another book that I haven't read that was recommended to me by my nephew over at Cambridge that said, that was called Born Believers, that essentially does the same thing. And it suggests that, humans are naturally inclined to see an intelligent designer, and they have to be taught the opposite. And I believe that that's why, on occasion, you get so much rage when it comes to the topic, because people's idea of the origin of existence, their deeply embedded value systems are tied to those ideas of the origin of the existence. And if you tell people that there's a God, then they've got to reevaluate their life choices all of a sudden.
Right. I think we talked to a guy one time, and he was arguing flat Earth on the show, but one of his arguments was kind of cool. I liked the philosophical idea of it was, imagine imagine you're at a red light, and it's like a lonely street. You're at a red light and there's nobody and it's not turning. And you look around, there's no cameras, nothing. You're more than willing to break the law because there's no cameras. There's nobody watching. You know what I mean? But now you imagine yourself at that same red light, but there's cameras and somebody's watching. That all of a sudden makes you think differently about whether or not you're going to break the law, right? Yeah. And so that's one of his arguments, is because he wanted to kind of just put into perspective that if God is above like the Hebrew cosmology of this dome or whatever, and he's watching, that everybody's mind would shift, at least morally, and say like, no, there's a creator watching. You know what I mean? And that's one of his philosophical arguments. But that argument is actually very true when it comes to your day-to-day living, right? Because looking at morality objectively and looking at those things, it really does change how people exist. There's an argument that, it's Christianity is the root cause, or religion is the root cause of all terrorists around the world, and all kinds of human, issues that we've had. But it's like, I think no one's even looked at our last century of history, where more people have died in this last century because of humanistic ideologies than a religion or Christianity ever has killed. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not a good viable argument, and so there's all these things where people just don't really understand or know. But asking you, going back to you, Aleko, going back to your specialties on Babylon on here. See, that's what happens when you let me talk.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I'm writing down notes as you talking to me. Yeah.
Okay, so something that you would really like people to know. I've kind of asked you questions, and then maybe there's something on your mind where it's like, I really wished he asked me. I have one more question, but we'll ask that at the end right now. But sure. It's not really more with intelligent design. It's more like I want to ask you a personal choice question, So Is there anything that you want people to know specifically? This points to intelligent design. This, this other idea, or this philosopher said this, or this, some of your research that, or just what do you want people to kind of get out of when they read your book or when they listen to your book? Like, what's the purpose of you writing this book exactly?
Well, I'd be disingenuous if I said I didn't want them to start talking to God and to find God. I mean, if you were to put it into a microcosm, I think that's exactly it. Because I've seen as I said in the beginning, I think that if just a mild interaction with some of these facts and just a momentary encounter with God don't lead you into an absolute obsession where everything else becomes meaningless, then I think that you're not paying attention or you haven't had that encounter. And I think that you've probably seen it, and I don't know if it's happened with you, and I've seen it definitely, but people that tend to encounter the Christ in prayer, or people that see some of these things, and I haven't even touched on some of the other things, like we talked about the flood momentarily. There's biblical gematria, there's equidistant letter sequencing, there's all these amazing things. If that doesn't lead you into an absolute obsession, then you're not paying attention. There's something amazing there, and when you go down that road, more or less it's a quest for truth. I think humans are either looking for truth or they're coasting, and I think that if when you encounter that type of thing, it's going to lead you into a life that is just, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. And, when you see Christians from time to time that have, were living a certain life, they were doing really bad things or doing whatever, just kind of living for themselves, and they encounter Christ, and you see that paradigm shift in them. It definitely gets you questioning, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. And I also want, if there's any other takeaways, I don't want anyone to take my word for it, on any of these things. I would maybe point them over to, well, first off, I would hope that maybe they would say hello to us on Instagram, the Intelligent Design Collective, or listen to the Intelligent Design Collective podcast. But I, by all means, am not an authority. All of these things that I've said today, that's not my work. That's not me breaking my back, centuries or decades of research. I would point them over to, I believe it's descentfromdarwin.org. You can Google a scientific descent from Darwin, where you have this conglomerate of over 1,000 scientists, well-known scientists, who have signed this document that is not necessarily saying, okay, we believe in a Christian God, but it's saying we're skeptical about Darwinism and how random mutation could have led to the complexity that we see here on Earth. Just go ahead and have a look, and there's a whole rabbit hole you can run down that, because I think that the special that you brought up, you asked me if I would watch it, just so we can get on the same page, and I caught about a third of it. I was quite busy that day, but it got me thinking. That was made back in 2008, when there was this ascent out of the secular abyss, mm-hmm. And if you look at it today, the idea of intelligent design is actually growing quite rapidly to explain some of the incredible phenomena that we see around us. And I'll just keep on rabbiting if I
no. So I think, and this is me, just what I'm getting out of just listening to what I've listened to thus far, listening to some of your episodes and looking forward to that audiobook and things like that. I think what it's going to happen is, first of all, it's going to help other people, equip them apologetically. Like you said, it's going to equip people that are already believers and to have some tools to be like, no. There actually isn't, like I said in the beginning of the show, like that girl said that was talking to my daughter, there actually isn't a huge a gap between science and the Bible. Like quite the opposite. I think this information that you're presenting is actually not forcibly marrying the two, and you're not trying to shove it in there, but if you're honest and read the biblical text in its context, it's actually bringing to life, like you said, a lot of mathematics. There's even verses that talk about entropy. There's even like a lot of things that talk about like how nature worked before we even knew how it worked. Like there's so many scientific things in the Bible that we don't really look at, because we just kind of look at it maybe like a maybe allegorical, maybe just kind of surface, try to find some archetypes and symbols in there, and really don't, maybe some moral stories or a daily pick-me-up kind of thing. But there's way more than that. It really does feed the mind, the body, the soul. It's just like this whole thing. It really comes to life. Like I think when John said that he's talking about the word is God, and all and that whole verse. It's kind of complicated to say. I can't quote it. I'm really bad at quoting verses too, but but it really brings to life what I'm talking about here. So I think your work will equip believers. It will bridge the gap between science and the Bible, and it'll help those people that are going away from secularism and kind of accidentally falling into spiritualism or other ideologies, and bring them back to Christianity, because these things were originated, in our opinion, of course, and what we can tell from the Bible, so I hope that's what it's going to do, because I can see it doing that, because it's going to really show those people that are already maybe on the verge of like, okay, maybe there is a creator, and then Aleko, your work's going to be like, yeah, he's over here in the Bible. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And so, God, like I think one of my favorite pastors just said, let's just do our best and God will do the rest, and that's just as simple as that, But my last question to you is, and I think it's very important, because I'm sure you've encountered a variety of religions you could have subscribed to or whatever. But why in the end, from your agnosticism, why did you choose Christianity above all things? I mean, I personally, when I was younger, we practiced forms of like witchcraft. We were Buddhist for a few years. We were Catholic. And then we just kind of went into the Protestant realm, things like that. I guess we're considered non-denominational. But I don't necessarily place myself anywhere. But I mean, there's so many. I mean, you're of Greek background. Why didn't you go worship Zeus and all them, or you know what I mean? Like or what's going on? So why God? Why Jesus?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I think it's because Jesus answered a couple prayers.
Right.
But not. It's more than that. I mean, from a literary standpoint. The first, put it this way, Alexander the Great, who I was named after, the first legitimate histories written about him were written about 480 years after the fact, but he's still considered a historical figure, right? I don't recall who it was, like if it was, that would have been Plutarch, and oh goodness, I can't remember. But same thing with Buddha. The first histories written about Buddha were about 500 years after the fact. Then you've got the person who people say was the first, the religion who people say was the first monotheistic religion, which was, goodness, what was it? That's, and I'm drawing a blank here. I had a bit of a long night last night, but Zoroastrianism. So people say, the first, Gothis of Zoroaster, that was the first idea of monotheistic religion. But the first book written about Gothis of Zoroaster wasn't until 1,000 years after the Christ. So they're making this claim that, this was the first monotheistic religion, except the first written history about him wasn't until about 1,000 years after. And I believe you can look that up in the Case for Christ, or it's pretty common knowledge. But a lot of these attempts at attempting or writing a religion were written well after the fact, or well after the person had lived. And I'm not claiming Alexander was a religion, but then you've got obviously Islam, which was essentially the book was put together by one man, and then you had the Hadith. So the Quran was written by one man, the Hadith was written, I don't know by how many people, but it's not really. I suppose literarily consistent, and there's a number of issues with that. I know that's another rabbit hole, but that's obviously a route I wouldn't have gone down. So I wouldn't have gone down the Buddhist route or that route, or obviously the Zoroastrian route. But then you've got the the scripture, which has a couple of phenomena that I don't think I would even begin to get into right now. But it's got gematria and equidistant letter sequencing. Now, equidistant letter sequencing is a phenomena that is essentially repeating letter sequences that reveal messages. And there's a number of books that have attempted to fake it. You've got like the Bible Code, where they try to put fake, because essentially when you try to disprove equidistant letter sequencing, you can create some good cases, like you can find things like the word Ralph in War and Peace, or you can find the ingredients for brownies in just name another book, Heart of Darkness or something, hidden in letter sequences. But the letter sequencing of the Bible is repeating, and it serves specific purposes. Like, for example, in Isaiah 53, which was the scripture that predicts the Christ, right, or predicts the crucifixion of the Christ. It reads almost like a movie script about his crucifixion. It's so detailed that Jews wanted to have it removed. Some Ashkenazi Jews wanted to have it removed from the Bible. They thought, okay, well, the Christians must have added this in, after the Christ, right? But then it was corroborated by the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were dated to 300 years before Christ, and there was Isaiah 53 predicting the crucifixion of Christ. But if you look at Isaiah 53 in equidistant letter sequencing, and I'm getting chills thinking about this, in repeating sequences, you have the names of everyone that was there or involved in the crucifixion of Christ, but Judas.
Wow.
So you have all the disciples. You have Pilate, you have Nicodemus, you have all these figures, and their names are in repeated encryption. So and it's the exact amount as well. So you have all the Johns and at different interval lengths, right?
Wow.
And they only repeat for that section, right? So for that section that's discussing the crucifixion of the Christ, and there's a lot more than that. So that's equidistant letter sequencing. Gematria, it's no way I could summarize it successfully. I would just sound like an absolute pleb trying to do that, but gematria is pretty incredible as well. So you have these coincidences that couldn't have been fabricated by men. The gentleman who discovered gematria, Ivan Panin at Harvard University, he essentially was quoted as saying that no amount of the most brilliant mathematicians in the world could have created some of these mathematical codes in the Bible that we see today. There's no way they could have planned this, and there's no way that a group of Jews 300 years before Christ could have written the names of all of these major players in the crucifixion into Isaiah 53. Right. So there's those things. And then from a historical perspective, Christ is one of the most corroborated figures ever written about in antiquity.
Yes.
So, it's typically from a historical perspective, one account of something back then is pretty good, and 2 is great, and 3 is exquisite. You have something like 5,000 manuscripts dealing with the Christ. So that's just from the pro perspective. Okay, so those people are like, okay, I'm trying to put this story together so you can learn about Christ. But then there's the people that were directly opposed to him, the peripheral perspectives. You've got the Jews who wrote about him in the Talmud, who called him a sorcerer, who did essentially performed magic and healed people in the name of evil, essentially. Right. So not only are they acknowledging his existence, they're acknowledging
even the Quran, I believe, was mentioning Jesus.
Yeah. But I think with the Quran, it would lose credibility because it was 500 to 700 years after the fact.
Right.
But
okay, got it.
The Talmud was written at the time of Christ, and then you had the Romans. You had several Romans who discussed the darkness that fell over the land when Christ was crucified, which is a corroboration. And the names escape me right now, like Tacitus and goodness, I can't remember. But you have several Romans who essentially documented the fact that the entire land went dark and there was a massive earthquake. Mm-hmm. And then one of the most fascinating so those are all corroborations within the immediate vicinity and time frame.
Literary, historic, and just the time frame, all of that coming together. And these are outside sources of extra biblical material. It's not biblical material.
Yes.
Yes.
But the most astonishing one to me, and I know I'm going to get this wrong just off the top of my head, and I should have maybe slept a little bit more last night. But I can hear myself drifting while I'm talking. I'm like, I wouldn't want to listen to this. But was in China. It was in the latter Han Dynasty, King Guangwu. I guess this was documented. He wrote, "Man from heaven died today." and all of the sins were put on all of the sins of the world were put on him. And it was one of the footnotes is there was a massive eclipse. Now, what's significant about that is the Chinese were very good at astronomy. They knew the stars quite well. There was several civilizations that they knew their stars, right? So the Chinese, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, probably a couple of others, right? But the Chinese, I knew, were especially quite good at that type of thing, and they were shocked by this eclipse that, according to King Guangwu, lasted for several hours, and it was dated to AD 30 to 33. Ooh. So this happened this king had this premonition that someone died, and he referred to him as a man from heaven. And what I'm doing is kind of giving you a paraphrase. I'm not giving you the exact version. I would recommend you look it up. But I can also give you the book for that later on, the name of the book that I
Oh, yeah. No, it's funny that you bring up the Chinese account, because I believe one of our guests actually wrote a whole book on the Chinese Empire and how they were very close to being like this monotheistic, and even some of their letters represent Hebrew stories. Like I believe their letter number 8 or something is like the symbol for a boat, which is like the Noah story or something, or 7 or something like that. Yeah. And he kind of just directed that, but yeah, like all of that is connecting, and this is all historical, extra biblical material, right? So it's just it's amazing. That is incredibly amazing, and I mean. Again, that's why I knew when I asked this question, and I know I didn't tell you that I was looking for the historical stuff, and I was like, I think he's going to approach this from the historical perspective. Gosh, I'm a good host. All right, wait a minute. I can't be prideful. So here we go. So, folks, if that didn't blow your mind, or if that stuff interests you, please message us. We'll get you some information. And of course, Aleko, I got nothing else to ask you. So anything else you want to get off your chest before we land this plane? And if not, where can people find your material, and where can they message you or email you, or your audiobook? When's that coming out? And give us some details.
Yeah, well, there's so many other things. It's such a big topic. Absolutely, and it works together like a mosaic. It comes together like a big puzzle. So if there's things that
I'll tell you what. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
If there is something specifically you want to set up, or maybe we can talk after the show and touch on other specific things that you think are very important. And if you'd like to come back for another volume 2 or something on intelligent design, you're more than welcome to come back again, and we'll focus on something else that you might think people might find interesting. You know what I mean? But sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I suppose, if you head over to the Intelligent Design Collective podcast, you can hear things like this. We do a weekly book club, and then once every few weeks, I release a chapter of the audiobook, which I'll be consolidating eventually and releasing to Audible, God allowing. I'll be releasing it to Audible and Kindle probably within the next couple of months, I'm hoping. But you can also head over to cosmology.life, the website. The URL is cosmology.life, and you can see some links to our stuff. So you can see the audiobook there, and we have an ancient Greek study, and you can also see the references. So I like to make sure everyone can see the references, all the information that I pull from, and to know that a lot of the legwork that was done on this was not my own. I'm just a guy that read some books and put some stuff together. Mm-hmm. A lot of these books.
You're the synthesizer.
What's that?
You're the synthesizer of the information.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. So it's a cumulative case. So you could read for a very long time, but if you put it together, it points one particular direction. So,
cool,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you'll send us those links, and we'll post those for the people, and so they can check out whatever you have to offer. Aleko, stick with me. These folks are going to listen to some dope jams, and we will talk while they're listening to music. Cool. We'll be right back, folks. Yeah.